I feel like people on kind of my side of the aisle tend to dismiss it, tend to say that institutional racism doesn't exist, and I feel like a lot of progressives throw that out there. But I think the problem is that it's a vague charge.
Mm-hmm.
I you might be surprised. I think institutional racism exists. I'm on that side, but I want the charges to be specific. I want to know what institutions, because when I go line by line at the institutions of racism, it comes from government policy and progressive policy, almost exclusively. So whether you want to talk about redlining, that was a product of the FHA created by FDR. Whether you want to talk about the the incentivizing of families to break up from welfare, which basically created a financial incentive to have kids out of wedlock. It's the reason why in the 40s, the black family was the strongest out of all the races. I think a less than 20% single motherhood rate. And today, 70% single motherhood rate. That's a direct result of incentivizing families not, getting married and having kids out of wedlock. And you can look at.
I have a question
really,
real quick, and I think probably your way of, I think you articulated maybe my feelings, a lot better than I did. I do think, I would say, again, I don't think it exists insofar as it is just this very vague, applies to everything, kind of almost hand grenade, type of thing that people try to throw out there. But I do have a question for you as it relates to how quickly it impacted black families. Why do you think that is? Because, you, in the same period of time, I think the white community is now in the neighborhood of like 40-ish% single motherhood rate.
It affected everybody. It gave the same incentive, but black people were more black people were in kind of the poverty area, so they were more affected by that policy. And so, with being a larger percentage that were still, now they were the fastest growing as far, like in the 40s and 50s, they were accumulating wealth faster than anybody else, and they were on a probably, I think if it wasn't for the Great Society, there would be a lot more assimilation, and there wouldn't be such the wealth divide that we see today. I think we look today and we see like this wealth gap between races, or how much the income gap between races. But I think that's intellectually lazy, because when you actually look at the wealth gap line by line and compare, instead of comparing black versus white, compare educated blacks that come from two-parent households, and you compare them to whites, and the divide's gone. It's the problem is that not enough black people are in those categories that make more money. A bigger indicator of success is, do you come from a two-parent household? Are your parents educated? Did you graduate high school? And I think the system is set up to disproportionately harm blacks. And that was kind of the basis for the Great Society. A lot of people talk about just behind the scenes how racist LBJ was. And after he passed that bill, or maybe during, he said, I'm going to have those N-words voting for us for the next 200 years.
Yeah.
Because it created the appearance that he was helping out black people while making them dependent on the government, where the dad was gone and government was now the paternal figure in the black community. And you want to talk about, gang membership and isolation, but not having a father present is devastating. And the consequences of not having a father present are devastating. And that's a direct result of a progressive policy that's still in existence today. And the position's still the same. The anti-institutional argument is we don't want welfare, we don't want dependency. And the progressive argument is that, no, we need to be the provider for the poor. We need to help them while they're poor, as opposed to my argument that says I want to help them not be poor. That's a kind of a fundamental difference. But you can keep going down the line. Gun control, that was a racist policy when it first came out. It's still a progressive policy. It's not. It's still our position that we're against gun control. Abortion. Margaret Sanger was a racist eugenicist. Abortions more often target black people. 30% of abortions are, 37% of abortions are black, and they're only 13% of the population. The population's been reduced by millions because of Planned Parenthood. A minimum wage law, prevailing wage law, those were to protect white unions. Prevailing wage law in construction, it was white unions that were pissed off in the North that were pissed off because you had these black construction companies. They would come up and they would outbid the white unions and steal all the work. And because, they were mostly black employees, they're kind of new into trying to get, gain experience and whatnot. But these black companies were kicking their ass. And instead of out-competing them, they passed prevailing wage law that said if you go after any government work, you have to pay the same amount that we do with a union. And it completely took away their ability to undercut their bidding, and that hampered black construction companies. The same with minimum wage law. Minimum wage law had the same intent, and it's disproportionately affected black youth, the black youth employment rate. Whether you go to schools, education, my point of view is that we should have a voucher system and school choice. The government, the progressive view is they want control over your schooling. They want government-run schools. And as a result, they did a study in Baltimore, and not a single student was in the schools that they studied was up to the reading level of their grade. And it's embarrassing. It's not even a matter of funds. It's a matter of how you spend the funds and the mechanisms in place for creating good education. Whether you get into police brutality. In 1994, they passed that crime bill under Clinton. It was written up by Joe Biden, and that's what put a whole bunch of cops into the inner city. Now, granted, that policy was actually partly motivated by leaders in the black community who wanted to cut down crime, but that bill is what we kind of see today in this game of police brutality. And then if you want to get into the accountability of police brutality, police officers are not held accountable because of negotiations with public unions. That's a progressive policy, is to have these public unions that negotiate. And when they did a study, they found in numerous municipalities you can't interrogate. They don't keep things on the record for more than 2 years. They give all the evidence against a cop before he even gets interrogated. And there's all kinds of protections. And the only reason the protections are in there is because of public unions, a thing that, limited government proponents are completely against. And so I challenge anybody, be specific. Don't just say institutional racism and throw it out there as a political football. Be specific as to which institutions, because we go line by line, and they're progressive big government policies. And if we want to end institutional racism, fucking join me, because
hey man, he's like I want the goal. He's like, I want to end this.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So let's talk about the actual racism and not just let it be out in the ether and use it as a political football to just destroy the American system or blame capitalism, for example.